The World Trade Organization is the only global organization that deals with the rules of trade between nations. The WTO Ministerial Conference is the organization's highest decision-making body, which meets every 2 years. The conference was repeatedly postponed due to COVID-19. But recently, the 12th WTO Ministerial Conference took place in June 2022 in Geneva after a gap of almost 5 years to make decisions on critical issues affecting trade. What are the WTO issues and what are the outcomes? The first issue is that of fish subsidies. Fishing is a big corporate business. The fish reserves are being exploited at a pace where the fish population cannot replenish itself. Since 2001, WTO members have been negotiating the banning of subsidies to fishermen on the grounds that they encourage overfishing. But countries like India demand exceptions for their fishing industry. Fishing beyond 200 nautical miles from the seashores of a country is termed distant water fishing. Developing countries that do not engage in distant water fishing want to be completely exempted from this subsidy banning. EU and the US are against blanket exceptions for developing countries. But this time at the conference, developing countries won some concessions in this agreement. Second issue. Developing countries want TRIPS waiver for vaccines and therapeutics. This is a proposal to temporarily waive patent protections on COVID-19 vaccines. Under the pressure from the pharma lobby, the developed countries oppose this. But now there has been an agreement. WTO members agreed to waive intellectual property patents on COVID-19 vaccines temporarily. It will allow the developing countries to produce and export COVID vaccines. But advocacy groups criticized the WTO waiver for being too limited in scope, as it did not cover all medical tools such as diagnostics and treatments. Next is public stock holding and agriculture subsidies. It is a challenging subject to negotiate. Public stock holding is a policy tool used by governments to purchase, stockpile, and distribute food to the poor. For example, the Indian government buys crops like rice and wheat from the farmers at a minimum spot price, which is generally higher than the market price. The government then stores and sells these at a low price to ensure food security to more than 800 million poor people. However, the rules of the Agreement on Agriculture limit the ability of the government to purchase food at government set prices. Developing countries want grains export from their public stock holding for international food aid. In the latest conference, in light of the global food shortages and rising prices caused by the war between Ukraine and Russia, a declaration was issued that they would avoid bans on food exports. However, countries such as India want assurances that its public stock holding program will not be challenged as illegal at the WTO. The fourth issue is regarding e-commerce transactions. In 1998, when the internet was still relatively new, WTO members agreed not to levy custom duties on electronic transmissions. Today, it is opposed on the grounds that developing countries have been losing revenue. Last issue is that of WTO reforms. Common but differentiated responsibility and special and different treatment provide developing and poor countries with flexibility and policy space. Also, the WTO makes decisions not by voting but by consensus. Developing countries want the continuation of the consensus principle and special and different treatment. Developed countries want to do away with the WTO's consensus principle. Also, developed countries want private sector participation.